All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Hopefully, thanks for joining us. Hopefully, we can see us, you can hear us. Just a quick introduction here of who we have on the call. My name is Nick Koutsoukos. I'm with Catchpoint, and I'm the CMO here. And I have with me on the top right of your screen, Mehdi Dowdy, who is the CEO and co-founder at Catchpoint. And on the top left of the screen, we have Patrick Meenan. You all know Patrick. Patrick is the founder of Webpagetest.org and is now the engineering fellow at Catchpoint, working for Catchpoint full-time. Gentlemen, thank you. How are you doing today?
Excellent.
Doing great. Yeah, it's exciting times. So
it is. So just to a quick logistical comments here from me. We wanted to set up this live Q&A following the announcement that we made on September the 16th. And in case you missed it, Webpagetest and Catchpoint are now together, and we're together for good. We received a lot of very positive feedback from many people in the community, from users of Webpagetest, as well as Catchpoint customers. And we just wanted to give you an opportunity to ask live questions to Patrick and Mehdi. So Patrick and Mehdi, you're going to be on the spot here, literally. And by the way, this is live and there's no fake backgrounds here. This is just my living room. We did receive some questions from some of you on Twitter in the past day or so. And just to make it a little bit easier, we'll start with a couple of those questions. Any of you that want to submit a question, whether you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or Periscope, you can do that. And I have a chat box here. I'll be able to see the question and direct it to Patrick and Mehdi. And the last thing I'll say, logistically, we've allocated about an hour from 1 p.m. Eastern to 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll take as many questions as we can. But if we run out of time and we can't answer all of them, we have the ability to record all the questions. And what we'll do is we'll distribute a Q&A via the website or Twitter, just to make sure that everybody that submitted a question gets an answer from Patrick and Mehdi.
And if you don't ask enough questions, you're stuck with me monologuing. So please ask a lot of questions.
So we have a bunch. We have a bunch here, and I think we can certainly keep going. So I'll start the first question here. Excuse me. So Mehdi and Patrick, it has been 2 weeks since we made the announcement. And I think, Patrick, you started officially a week before we made the announcement at Catchpoint. So I know that we've been working a lot of good things. And the question really that people want to know, what has changed over the last couple of weeks? What's new as far as webpagetest.org is concerned?
So I think from what you'll be able to see that's changed and that's new is there have been a lot of new locations rolled out already. So the ops team has been fabulous at rolling out agents and in lots of interesting locations that we haven't been able to get agents into before. And so like Dubai, Bahrain, Taiwan, Jakarta, and just 2 days ago, I think, finally got some agents in Beijing and Shanghai behind the Great Firewall. That's always been a challenge. There has been a Beijing agent on and off with only Firefox because the firewall blocks access to Google. You can't install Chrome. And so the ops team did a fabulous job building and pushing images with Chrome, with Firefox, with all of the browsers on it behind the firewall for you to do testing on. So I think there's been a lot of progress on the agent side of things, getting things deployed. There's been a lot of stuff that you haven't seen. If you stalk my GitHub, last week has probably been the most active week of me on GitHub in the last year. And so I've been pushing a lot of code to make the agent or the server a little more scalable, resilient, be able to do things across multiple servers and things like that to get it ready to move out of my basement so we can successfully transition all of the infrastructure out into ops managed, although I am going to dread the day they take away my SSH access.
We're not going to do that, Patrick.
Sounds good. Mehdi, any comments?
No, it's you know, as Patrick said, the last few weeks have been very interesting. Just making sure that we can get a handle and understand Webpagetest, and for our SRE and Ops team to understand the requirements, especially as we think about the next phases. This is, again, phase one, which is like, how can we add more cloud nodes to the Webpagetest environment? The most interesting part for me is going to be, how can we add Webpagetest in other locations outside of just the cloud? So that's very, very interesting. And obviously the transition from Patrick's basements into our core infrastructure in Las Vegas, and just getting to have our engineers spend time with Patrick, understand the requirements, understand his vision, because it's really about taking Patrick's vision to the next level. That's why we did all of this, and for him to be full-time on Webpagetest, how can we strengthen Webpagetest? So it has been fascinating, and again, I just can't wait to see the end results over the next few months.
Okay, great. So then there's another question that came in last night through Twitter. It's very clean and clear. So the question is, with more dedicated engineering firepower, now that you're full-time, Patrick, and you have access to Catchpoint teams, what are the highest priority features in the areas where you want to focus and you're excited to tackle first?
I'd say probably P0, absolutely number one, is the scaling. It was always meant to be eventually scaled beyond a single server sitting in my basement, but there's never been a need. And so all of the architecture for the server has been about just running on a single box. And I'd say the absolute top priority is to fix that. And, reliable test queues, reliable servers, load balancing, sort of all of that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, that's not like user visible, and for better or worse, my basement has been really reliable, so it's going to be even less visible than you might normally see, but it'll let us take the sort of capacity and testing and capabilities up a notch to the next level. And if we want to do several orders of magnitude more testing, that's not going to run on a single box, right? And if we want to have it reliable, always available, that's going to require some back-end work that you don't see. On the front end side of things that you do see, and we've got some questions about the UI, so I'll leave the UI until we get to those questions. I've got strong feels about the UI, but on the agent front, it needs some TLC. It's got fairly good Chrome support. The browsers are changing. I really want to see us do something with WebKit or Safari, or at least the WebKit engine. The mobile emulation right now does a really good job for emulating Android mobile devices, for example. And there's a lot of Chrome capacity, and we can deploy Chrome in the cloud. And there's a lot of Chromium-based browsers. And Firefox is fairly easy to deploy in the cloud, but there's a huge amount of traffic on Safari and on iOS, where the best option we have right now is emulating an iPhone on Chrome, which isn't great. Well, at least for scaling, our best option is that. And that's not great because it's a completely different browser engine. And I had tweeted out like maybe a week or two ago the difference between an emulated iPhone and a real iPhone for CNN, for example. And the viewport and everything else was right when it was emulated, but when you load it on an actual iPhone, all of the text on the page shows up for about a second, and then it completely disappears for like 5 to 10 seconds, and then it reappears. And that's not the kind of thing you see when you're testing emulation with the different browser engine. And so probably the number one thing that I want to tackle that you will see is something where we can scale WebKit out on desktop agents or cloud agents that we can easily distribute anywhere. And then longer term, see what we can do about getting real iPhones and real Android devices out somewhere other than my basement. But it's always, Webpagetest has always been about the accuracy of the measurement, and I want to see what we can do to sort of extend that.
Sounds good. And just to remind everybody that's watching this live, please submit your questions here. I can see them all, irrespective of whether you're watching, how you watching the live stream. And I'll take a couple of questions on live here, but I'll go to the UI question, Patrick, because we had 3 people commenting on that last night. So 3 related questions, comments around the UI. The first one was, don't change the UI. It's perfect and we love it. Can you promise that we won't change it? Before you answer that, hold on though. The second one was change the UI. It's the opposite. Any plans to change the UI? Maybe not the look and feel, but in terms of accessibility, given more resources, it would be great to make it accessible as possible. And the third one was somewhere in the middle, right? Which is, don't just do a UI revamp, but can you make it a little bit, improve it in terms of usability? So.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the UI right now, the UI as it is exactly probably goes back, my guess is 5 years. But if you go back to the Wayback Machine in 2008 when it first launched, it was a lot more plain. There was no styling, but it was basically the same UI. And so you're looking at, and I had absolutely no UI skills back then. I probably have even less now. So my number one requirement whenever I've talked to someone about redoing anything with the UI has always been, you can't take away functionality, right? Because that's the core reason people use Webpagetest is it's the deep functionality. That said, there's also a lot of muscle memory around Webpagetest, and like the waterfall and instantly recognizing what's going on in the waterfall because of how it's laid out, the colors and that kind of thing. So none of that will ever change. What will probably get some TLC, and I'd love to see happen, is the UI right now is not responsive at all. Right? It is exactly like 980 pixels wide, and I picked that because that was the virtual viewport width when iPhone first launched, when it's emulating a desktop view. And so it's never changed. It doesn't handle really widescreen monitors. It doesn't handle mobile devices. As I think it was probably Matt Hobbs that mentioned, it's not accessible. You can't translate it because like all of the strings are buried, intermingled in the PHP code. So I'd like to see a lot of that cleaned up so we can have a responsive UI that's accessible, that can be localized, that looks a lot like it does now, so that you won't be jarred or shocked, and the muscle memory will still work and everything will still be where you expect it to be, but hopefully more modern. And I would like to see us do that. My guess it'll be a trade-off and may take a little while. I tend to steer and err towards adding capabilities, but the UI definitely needs a lot of TLC.
Related to this, Sergey here has a comment. His comment is, you can say it right, make it easy to contribute to the UI, please. So I guess he's talking about being able to have multiple people contributing to the way the UI looks as an open source project. What are your thoughts on that?
Sergey, we're hiring.
It's open source. You can PR now. No, it's a mess right now, right? And so hopefully as we start layering it correctly, we are going to keep all of the development out on GitHub. So you'll be able to contribute. But hopefully once we have sort of the separations put in place properly, if you just want to tweak the UI, you'll be able to do it in the UI part of the code. If you want to contribute a localization, for example, hopefully the strings will all be pulled out and you can contribute a localization.
Yeah. So let's take a question here that was submitted live by Sergey. With every open source and commercial interests meeting together, there's always a question of competition. Let's address this one. So how is this collaboration will impact competitors' ability to use Webpagetest? And of course, the example here that Sergey is putting is SpeedCurve, for example, and others. So it's a tricky question, but we should address it.
A lot of that is going to be on the partner competitor company's decision of what they want to do. The web page test code as it stands right now is Apache 2 BSD licensed. Almost every competitor that I know of, or commercial user, I would say, rather than competitor, is already using a fork of Webpagetest. And so they're building off of their own fork. They're using the same core, but they've added their own special sauce to it as well, right? And so I imagine they're going to continue operating off of a fork and continue going along. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to mean for merging forks together or future contributions or anything like that. A lot of that still needs to get sorted out. But we are going to continue building as much of this out in the complete open as possible. And having, especially for like if you're running private instances and you're non-commercial and you're running your own versions of Webpagetest, we want to make sure that you have access to all of the code. You can continue doing exactly what you're doing today. And so our fork, if you would, of Webpagetest, just like all of the other competitor or commercial providers, our fork will be out in the open. And so you can take what we're running internally and use it for whatever you want to do as well.
Okay. All right, great. So there was a question here, live question from Sergey again. Maybe you can start taking this one.
No, I'm just loving it. You know.
What are the plans for integrating Webpagetest functionality into CatchPoint products?
Yeah, so it's going to be an interesting set of trade-offs. The main reason Patrick and I decided to join forces is multiple folds, but one of them that was of interest to me was how can we CatchPoint get into the DevOps community, right? We do really well. Our product gets used a lot by some of the biggest companies, SRE teams around the world. But on the DevOps side, people don't think about monitoring as much as they should, or not in the way they should to some degree. And Webpagetest is that anchor into the DevOps community. And shifting performance and monitoring to the left, and enforcing and creating and working a lot on building this culture of performance. And Sergey is a huge advocate and a huge ambassador, and he's been around the New York area. I think he's Mr. Performance in New York, and he's going to replace the Statue of Liberty at this point. So the plans, plan number one is don't change Webpagetest, right? So that's rule number one. Rule number two is we're talking to a lot of companies. Some of them are existing customers of CatchPoint. Others have never heard of us, and we're spending a lot of time listening to their feedback on what they want to see and what they don't want to see. We are going to try to reuse some of the capabilities that we have and bring that to Webpagetest. Things like obviously our infrastructure, our backend, our data storage, our command and control for the queuing potentially, right? So again, these are still in discussions. So try to scale Webpagetest as much as possible, leveraging what we've learned, how to scale over the last 12 years. We've been doing this. I mean, we run an unbelievable number of tests, not just browser tests, but DNS tests and everything on the CatchPoint side. So we've learned the scalability problems for the past 12 years, and how can we bring that to the table? Now, there are, just this Monday, we had a great meeting, Patrick and I, with a very large, important customer of ours that relies heavily on Webpagetest on their dev and they're part of their CI/CD platform. And they gave us some really good ideas on what they want to see in terms of CatchPoint and Webpagetest together. But there is something extremely important, is what we were completely aware of, is the user base is very different. The developer is very different than somebody that is doing continuous monitoring from an ops or an SRE perspective. So, so we have to take that into consideration when it comes to the UX and the UI design and what features and capabilities we need to bring to the table. There will be a version at some point where it's integrated, where you can log in and you can see your web page test result, and your SRE team looks at the monitoring telemetry that we collect. So that's in the plan, in one UI, one, you know, one workflow. But right now, it's really the focus is on the scale, the migration of web page test, the making sure that we can add as many nodes as possible to the web page test platform, and to work with the community on making sure that we have really good ideas and vision on what we want to do next. So that's the plan right now. But we, you know, and I'll reiterate a little bit what Patrick said, which is the fundamentals of web page tests is what makes web page tests interesting. I've been a huge fan since I've met Patrick in 2008. The Los Angeles web page test nodes are running in my garage, and so I bow to them every morning to make sure they're running. And so, so you know, there is a lot of respect for what web page test has done in terms of bringing the concept of performance to the masses. Literally, that's what the credit goes to web page test and to a lot of other people that have made web performance not a luxury only reserved to the Googles of the world, right? And so there is that part that's my number one priority with Patrick. And then after that, it's like scaling, adding features. iOS is very important. That's something that the team at Catchpoint has spent many years working on, with the limitations of iOS hardware and software and security. Also, where do you put these things in a data center outside of Patrick's basement? So we worked on special hardware, special enclosures. We've been doing a lot of research around that. So this is also where the collaboration between Patrick and our team is going to be critical in bringing monitoring from iOS and from the Mac ecosystem, the Apple ecosystem to the world. So we're very excited about that. And so, and then again, it's listening to you guys. That's what we really are very keen on, and to build what's next.
Okay, thank you both. There's a couple of questions here around training and university, but I'll put those into one side because I want to leave that for a little bit later on. There was a good question here live. Are there any plans for offering new or advanced functionality only as a freemium option? Meaning, we have the freemium option as it is today. Are we planning to release a more advanced freemium option in the future?
I'd say I don't know that we have any plans. I can't think of anything functionality-wise, like advanced browser capability-wise, for example, that we'd want to lock behind anything. I mean, we want to try and make all of that as open and as available as possible for free for using on webpagetest.org. My guess is you'll see the freemium line get drawn, or the commercial offerings come into when you want to run thousands of tests from bunches of locations, or you want us to manage a private instance for you, or like really high API volumes and stuff like that. That's where, if we want to provide testing as a service for you, that's not something I could run out of my basement effectively. And that's something that Catchpoint does very well, right? And so I think you're going to start to see the lines drawn around things like that, right? Or, I mean, even location-wise, all of the locations that we've been deploying are expected to be available out on the public instance. Maybe there might come a case, and this is like a real stretch, where there's an iPhone in some esoteric place that has like a whole lot of demand that we have to restrict access to or something like that. But I mean, the cases where I can see us trying to firewall off any capabilities from the free one-off testing is minimal to non-existent.
Correct.
Sounds good. All right, let me take a couple of questions here that were submitted last night. we'll start with the nodes here. There was one question specifically. Do you have plans to add nodes in other locations? I think the answer is yes, we've answered that. But the specific question was Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo. So
one, I think the specific question was around mobile devices, like physical phones. And so,
okay.
Yes, but that one's going to be a longer term effort, right? It's easiest to deploy cloud nodes, right? Because you can scale up and down. It's easier to deploy physical PC environments, right? Be it Windows or Linux or whatever, because you can get bare metal in a colo. It's hardest to deploy mobile devices in data centers or in last mile locations, both for remote manageability and just for getting those devices physically into data centers, hands and eyes, and that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably the progression that you'll see nodes come online. But the plan is at some point in the future to get mobile devices out of my basement and distribute them as wide and far as possible.
Okay. Sounds good. And there was another question yesterday, Patrick, around the previous free offering of API calls in the self-hosting instance. Do you want to take that one too?
Sure. I mean, we've kind of gone around it a little bit, but yeah, so the free API offering on the webpagetest.org was meant to be a get stuff working, test it out, do some low volume testing with it, and then deploy a private instance, because I can't run out of my basement a free monitoring service for everyone in the world to use. And so the only alternative at the time was deploy your own private instance. What will probably be coming along the line in not too distant future will be we'd like to offer you an option where you don't have to stand up a private instance and you can do at scale API testing commercially. It's not, I seriously doubt it's going to be free, because providing a free monitoring service is, there are costs to that. And so expect that part will probably be commercial, and it won't be anything unlike if you're using an actual commercial monitoring service for doing your testing, but you can do whatever you want with an API. There will always be the option to deploy your own private instance if you want, but it's unlikely that the completely free, do all the testing you want kind of thing will ever come back. And it was limited technically, but I was getting cases where there were some fairly large internet companies that were registering dozens of API keys and rotating through them, and they were running thousands of tests a day. And, that sort of starts to cross the line.
Okay. Sounds good. There's another question here we'll take live that was submitted. This is for you, Patrick. You've always somehow managed to keep up great pace with Chrome developments, which perhaps has been a challenge for others. Do you expect to continue to keep up with that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, now that I get to work on it full time, I expect I'll probably be doing better. So the way the web page test agent works right now is there's technically two layers. Waterfall data is the part that usually breaks with Chrome, because to get the really accurate waterfall data, web page test parses the raw net logs, and those are unstructured, undocumented, unsupported. And so if anyone on the networking team at Chrome changes part of the string of the comment that goes into a netlog, for example, they will break the detailed version of what we get in one way or another. And, with H2 and H3 and Quick and all of that evolving, those messages tend to change from release to release. There's another layer on top of that where Webpagetest uses the documented, supported DevTools APIs for request timing. It's not as accurate, but it keeps that there as a fallback. So if the lower layer of the networking data breaks, you may not notice. The waterfalls may still look right. Your data is mostly going to be accurate, but it's not going to be as accurate as Webpagetest generally provides. And so historically, what's happened is I notice maybe a week after Chrome has reached stable that, why do those waterfalls look weird or something like that? And I'll realize that, it's been broken for the last week on stable, and I'll go and fix it. Hopefully, now that I have a lot more time to focus on it, we'll be able to do testing while Chrome is still in beta or in Dev Canary, detect the changes a lot sooner, and it'll never be broken by the time it reaches stable. So I'm hoping I'll actually get even better at keeping up excuse me, with Chrome releases. But I don't think it'll ever get worse, all right? Because so Webpagetest has that layering in there to protect against breakage in Chrome releases, for example.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take one more question here that was submitted live, and then there was a set of questions around training, tech writers, and people are asking about learning about web performance and becoming more knowledgeable. So we'll switch topic in a minute. But the question here from Sergey again is, will there be a developer level access to API for basic integrations like WPT bot for, say, Twitter, as an example?
Yeah, I mean, so the existing... so I assume he means basic developer level free access, or, I mean, the existing API is going to be backward compatible with whatever we do. Whether or not there are like community API keys for open source projects or something like that, I don't know that we've sorted that out. My guess would be at some level, yes. But we'll have to talk about, probably on a one-off basis, how much testing it does, what's it's used for, how's it used within the community, just so it doesn't get abused, kind of like the free API keys were before.
Okay, sounds good. Let's change topic a little bit here. So there was a few questions that came up around Webpagetest University. And just before I go into that, I'll mention a personal experience I had with my previous employer. I used to work for a company called Riverbed, and back in 2010, we acquired a company called Case Communications, which was the corporate sponsor of Wireshark, which again was very similar to WPT, an open source project. One of the things that we did as a corporate sponsor is we sponsored the Wireshark University, which was just basically a training event for many of the users, the Wireshark community users. So there's a lot of questions here about that, specifically what WPT University. There was another question around updating the book that was written a while ago. Patrick, you must know this.
Yeah. So
and then there was another question here, for somebody that wants to develop deep knowledge of web performance and the power of WPT, what resources do we have available to do that?
Yeah,
that's a big topic.
It all folds together, and luckily Rick is in the chat, so he can commit to writing. I think the book was probably my greatest coup ever, because I didn't write a single line of it. I think I may have reviewed it. But Rick was one of the authors. I think they've been hoping to do a Rev 2, because the original version of the book is fairly old at this point. Most of it is still pretty accurate, because Webpagetest has added a lot of functionality, but it hasn't like removed what was there before, and deploying private instances and all of that is still very similar, and will continue to be similar to how it was before. But if he can talk his co-conspirators into revving, and I'm not sure if O'Reilly is still, I know they got out of the conference business. I assume they're still doing books one way or another. But we are going to be doing much more documentation as well, sort of like performance, how to read waterfalls, 101s, get introductions, and just have a lot more how to use Webpagetest documentation available. Right now, if you want to get into or learn more about, I'd say, web performance in general, more so than just Webpagetest, because Webpagetest sort of brings out a lot of the fundamentals, but you really need to know the fundamentals before. So like Steve's exceptional or high performance websites book, the second version of it, the first one definitely much more than the second one. There's like Matt Hobbs has an awesome blog post on reading a Webpagetest waterfall that actually goes into the film strips, but it tears apart a waterfall, all the pieces, what are the likely causes of different issues, and how to interpret what's going on because there's a lot of information packed in, and some of it's not like completely obvious into the waterfall. The other huge resource I'd recommend is the calendar.perfplanet.com, Sergey's annual Perf Planet calendar, advent calendar. It's been going on since, I don't know, 2008, 2009. Every year there's 25-ish articles written all about web performance, most of them by names you'll recognize in the industry. And so if you read like 10 years worth of performance articles, you've got a lot of the content about the web performance industry there.
Yeah, but one of the things that we're going to be doing is investing heavily into sponsoring the education around web performance, not Catchpoint, not Webpagetest, but in general web performance. I feel like the last few years, especially with velocity going away, that we have lost a lot, in my opinion, and it's nice to see that just the folks, whether it's Cliff or Sergey and Henry, it's like a reunion of velocity virtually. So it's nice to see all of the folks asking questions. But that's something that we really need to do a better job in general, because we need to teach a new generation of people about web performance, right? Because as everybody knows, it's not a one-time thing. You don't optimize once and forget. Performance is something that needs to be constantly brought to the leadership of your organizations to make sure that performance budgets are allocated, resources are allocated. So there is a strong interest in from my part at least, in making sure that we invest in the education of Webpagetest and the web performance in general. So again, we're in hiring mode, guys. So if anybody's listening, whether they're willing to come and help Catchpoint and Webpagetest achieve those goals in education, in writing books, and in contributing, ping me and Patrick. We're all ears. And by the way, we're operating Webpagetest at Catchpoint as a separate kind of entity of some sort, with its own engineering resources. It's going to have its own marketing resources and everything else. So just to make sure that we don't mix the open sourceness of Webpagetest and the community aspect of it with the commercial. And it's obviously, as everybody has shared with me, it's a fine line, but we're going to try to walk it as straight as possible. And so again, the education, the Webpagetest University is a big thing. And if anybody is interested in coming and working with Patrick and making web performance super important, please let us know.
And I will add, we've got at least two of the big community leaders in the chat. There are a lot of local web performance meetups. Sergey runs the awesome New York one. Henri runs an awesome one in Toronto. These days, it's a little harder, but there have been a lot of virtual ones going on. The London Web Perf meetup is sort of the gold standard by which a lot are held, and they hold monthly community meetups that are broadcast and available to watch online. They pull in a lot of the speakers that you'd normally see at a big web performance conference. And Sergey also has I think it's monthly, the Meet for Speed, which is kind of one of my favorite things to do. It's nothing's pre-planned or prepared. You all hop in, you bring a website that you want to analyze, and you go through all of the different tools and dev tools and Webpagetest and figure out how do we make it faster, and you're all sort of hacking on it together.
Yeah, I love that part. And the thing that struck me, one of my favorite parts of Velocity was the day before, where everybody would come together and do those 101 sessions with you, and the hack at nights, where people would literally try to make their site faster and better. So that's something that I would love to be able to do at scale, with the help of the community, of course.
Great. Thank you both. There's a question here from Paul. Patrick, you can see it, but I'll read it. This is regarding the forum section of WPT. So will it continue to exist? And the code is
Some
remain
form of
available.
discussion will continue to exist. I don't know if it's going to be the MyBB forums that are run on the current. Don't tell anyone, not like we're broadcasting this or anything, but that code is ancient, and I'm sure it's a security hack waiting to happen. It hasn't been updated, and it's not supported anymore. And so to say it's on its last legs is probably an understatement, but there will be and continue to be a public web performance discussion forum of some kind tied to Webpagetest where we can have the same discussions. Where or what platform that's on hasn't sort of been figured out yet.
Okay. So another question here that I scrolled back up, and we're going back to the commentary here, but question, I think it was from Cliff again. You mentioned trying to close the gap on monitoring iOS Safari / Safari. Any plans for device labs in Catchpoint's future? I guess it's.
Yep, I think Cliff probably hopped on after we chatted about that a little bit, but yes, okay. It's probably longer term. We need to figure out how to deploy devices in data centers and last miles, but it's very much something that we're working towards.
Okay, great. Another question here from Adam. Do you also support Brave browser?
Absolutely. It's not on all of the test locations, but if you go to Dulles, you can already test with Brave. It's technically supported by all of the agents. We just haven't deployed it everywhere. And there's probably nothing. Opera has been, so I mean, the agent, the Chromium-based part of the Webpagetest agent transparently supports Chrome, all of the versions, stable, Safari, beta, Canary, whatever. Microsoft Edge, Chromium-based, Samsung Internet, Brave, Opera. Those are the ones that come to mind. Opera has always been kind of sketchy on the agents because their update process can sometimes hang waiting for user input. And so I had to pull Opera off of a lot of the nodes. But Brave has a really clean update. And I think I only have Brave stable on Dulles right now, but it technically supports the Brave stable and beta running side by side as well. And so I think it's probably worth going back and figuring out what browsers we want to make available in all of the locations. But everything that's non-mobile physical device should be able to have Brave on it. And there's no reason we haven't, other than just not doing it, we haven't done that yet. But you can do it now in certain locations.
Okay. So we've got about 18 minutes for this broadcast. The numbers actually that I see are going up. Interesting, more people are hopping on and asking questions. Let's take that question from Rick. Webpagetest scripting is super powerful. What's on your future wish list? Our future wish list, I should say.
So, I mean, the scripting is super powerful, but it's super hard to use, right? And so, I know there was a recent script recorder that works with Puppeteer, for example. There's been a lot of asks to get it to work with WebDriver style scripting. I think, so there are some things you can do with the Webpagetest scripting that you can't do with either one of those. So there will always be a hand editing of some kind, but I'd like to see better support for using like the script recorder type tools to generate a Webpagetest script that goes through a login flow, for example, or to have a language that looks much more like WebDriver. I don't know that we'll ever be able to literally run WebDriver scripts because the way WebDriver scripts are written, you're actually driving the browser rather than more of a, these are the steps to execute the next step. But finding sort of what that middle ground is and moving away from my hacked up tab delimited one command at a time scripting language. Yeah, it's definitely on the list to look at.
Great. I mean, again, we'll try to leverage here some of the things we have. So on the Catchpoint side, we use Selenium plus our own sauce on top of it, and we are moving to to other technologies as well. And so we'll try to see if there is if the two agent teams we have now, the web page test agent and the Catchpoint agent team, can leverage the same future scripting language, because there is a need at some point for, again, the picture of the future is a dev team uses web page test to test something, and then the operations team can use the same script for production monitoring. So that's going to be important to come up with a single way of doing things, but something that everybody uses.
Okay, good. Hey guys, we've got 15 minutes, and just encourage you to type any questions here. So leverage the fact that Patrick and Mehdi are live here. Cliff, no, you're wrong. Mehdi's office has been becoming a lot cleaner for a while, way before he started talking to Patrick here. So he's been working on clearing his office for quite a while. So I wanted to let you know.
At least,
you know, Cliff, I've never stayed at my house this long since COVID started. Been in this chair for the last 8 months. That has never, ever happened. So I had to clean up after March because it was a mess.
I was going to say, it's at least the part of the office that's visible in the camera is clean. Yeah. If it's anything like my son's room, there's a pile of stuff in the corner.
Mehdi, let me ask you a question. So yes, we've seen some of the feedback that people had on Twitter in response to Patrick. You've been talking to many Catchpoint customers. What sort of feedback have you received after the news?
Well, so the first was how impressed and how surprised I was to find out that so many of our existing customers have their development team use Webpagetest. So that was just unbelievable. I mean, I had some anecdotal stories here and there, but the responses that we've gotten since we emailed and notified our customers has been through the roof. So that was extremely interesting to learn about the penetration of Webpagetest in those companies. And so the feedback has been very similar to what we've been hearing from the community, which is keep it simple, improve it, invest in it, cherish it, feed it, care for it. And that's the message that we knew, Patrick and I, before we decided to do this partnership, but it's just a reinforcement. You hear it directly from our customers. Again, I'm very impressed to see what some of these companies have built on top of Webpagetest, but it's also, I mean, just this past Monday, people were telling us, like, well, we don't want to maintain this, or we don't want to build a queuing system. Why can't you use the Catchpoint queuing system that handle hundreds of millions of tests a day, right? So that's the feedback that we've heard so far, but again, extremely positive. And you know, a lot of people reminded us of that we're the custodian of a great resource called Webpagetest, that and we need to take care of it, and that's the plan. Again, we wouldn't have done it if there was any other plan besides making Webpagetest stronger, right? So
yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of please don't break it, and that's absolutely requirement number one. I will say I'm surprised. It's a little shocking, I'd say, learning how many people are running private instances, because it's almost literally everyone we've talked to has a private instance of Webpagetest that they're managing because they couldn't use like the public API at scale or whatever. And probably my number one failing, you can call it failing or not tracking users, but I have no idea how many people deploy private instances of Webpagetest because there's no sort of central infrastructure for it. You can just take it and go build. And so it was always kind of a guess based on how many people ask questions about deploying private instances. But it's still surprising to hear that like every single customer that we talk to uses like Catchpoint for their monitoring and their ops monitoring, but they've also got a private instance of Webpagetest that they're bringing up or working with to try and get for the dev teams to be able to do ongoing CI testing and stuff.
Great. Thank you both. Actually, Simon must have hopped in after we talked about the UI, but he's asking, are there any plans for UI improvements? But of course, he loves the current UI.
Yeah. Basically, don't break it. Hopefully make it responsive, localizable, and accessible, and sort of iterate on it, but don't change everyone's muscle memory. Can't remove functionality, that kind of stuff. So,
okay. Let me ask you a question here. Since you joined, Patrick, and working with Catchpoint team, what has been your experience working with the ops team, working with the marketing team? What has been your experience so far?
I mean, it's been great. The ops team in particular, Roman, who's the one I'm mostly working with on agents, I told him how to deploy agents on the cloud or how to build them. He's gone off and automated Packet for building images. He's got it auto scaling. He's got it distributing to all sorts of clouds and end nodes and locations automatically, and built a pipeline for it. And so they've all been, and it's not just Roman, it's like the dev team's been really great to work with. We're sort of comparing notes and learning from each other. Everyone's been really great to work with, and it's just kind of reinvigorating and exciting, especially to be focused back on web testing full time again. It's hard to explain, but it's been very refreshing, I'd say.
Great. And have you come across any challenges that have been perhaps more difficult than you thought when you originally started thinking about integration and moving? Or has everything been pretty easygoing so far?
I mean, everything technically has been really easygoing so far. I mean, I loved comparing notes with Mehdi on the hardware that he's building and working on. He still works on hardware in his garage. I'm sure that frustrates everyone else. Probably the only painful part is, like you mentioned, I joined Catchpoint a week before we made the announcement, and I joined secretly. So there weren't a lot of people in the company that I knew I joined. And so I was added to all of the systems through a back door, basically. And now we're trying to unwind that, because the way I was added to the systems didn't trigger all of the, okay, let's get you added to the VPN, let's get you added to all of these tools and stuff. And so now we're sort of going, okay, what did we miss by adding Pat secretly? And so it's none of the exciting stuff. It's all sort of the get up to speed on all of the corporate tooling now that we get to unwind the way I came in. Yeah.
No more secret doors. That's the lesson I learned from
it seems like a simple question, right? Hey, can we add Pat without telling anyone? Sure.
You were Patrick M for quite a while, I remember, right? So who's this Patrick M? That's a mysterious person. And then we unveiled you during one of our all hands, which was quite fun. Okay, I think
so there was one question about evangelism, and from Ishan about basically getting non-technical stakeholders to be more aware of Webpagetest, and it's not a problem they have with Lighthouse. I don't think you'll ever get the level of evangelism that you get from Chrome's DevRel team and adding Lighthouse to search, for example, right? But I think there's certainly within the dev community, there's a lot of awareness of Webpagetest. Even outside of the dev community, the sort of the film strips, the side-by-side videos, that kind of stuff tends to get awareness of Webpagetest within the non-technical parts of the company. I don't know that we're in a great position to be able to evangelize to all of like the SEO world, or we kind of rely on a lot of you, right? The devs within organizations to make your peers aware of what they can get from Webpagetest. And a lot of it may come from tooling. So one of the things that I'm hoping to be able to do with the API, and sort of along the lines of what Sergey was asking, but not directly, is encourage tools to be built on top of it that address verticals that we may not address, right? And so there may be like an SEO tool that does a bunch of stuff, but also wants to do a film strip or get some grades or get a Lighthouse result. and integrate with the Webpagetest API to do that. And there may be a whole bunch of other verticals, like a theme garden, for example, may want to run Webpagetest runs and film strips against all of the themes and start exposing that. And so I think the evangelism is largely going to have to be built on top of integrations with some of the, because right now, Webpagetest, the way I look at it as a one-off tool at least, is largely dev tools, but shareable and consistent and reproducible, right? And so you don't necessarily get your CEO or your marketing team opening up the dev tools in the browser for the sites that they're on. And so I think the evangelism is probably going to be around tooling that is built around the Webpagetest API more so than Webpagetest directly.
Right. And Patrick, if I may add something on what you just said, the picture of the future that both Patrick and I talked about before we agreed to do this transaction. It was a picture where there is a marketplace at some point of things, super useful things that are built on top of Webpagetest. And there's some amazing tools already out there, but it's like, how can we create an ecosystem of plugins, tools, little widgets that can make people's life easier or bring some visibility to parts of an organization, etc., on top of Webpagetest. And so your creativity is going to be important, and we want to enable that, right? So the community is great, but it's also the marketplace, and marketplace not in the commercial sense, but a place where people can build and offer services, whether it's consulting, performance optimization, but also tools and other add-ons on top of Webpagetest.
And Simon's here. I bet he's just like jumping up and down. I built one of those. So Request Map, which Simon Hearn built, is one of the awesome tools built on top of Webpagetest API, which is used outside of sort of the dev environment, where you put in the URL and it'll build the full map of all of the domains that get pulled in and by what. So you can see your retargeting pixels or your tag manager, all of the crap, all of the stuff that it's pulling into the page load. And so I expect you'll see a lot of that.
Patrick, we used to work for those companies.
Yes.
Let's have some respect for them.
Some of you did. No, I mean, it's interesting because it's a discussion I have a lot, and this is a little bit of a segue, but we all kind of want to make money, right? And so you can't build just your website and strip everything off of it. And so one of my favorite stories, for better or worse, is like when I was at AOL, we wanted to move the ComScore tracker out of the head because it was blocking rendering. And so we did that for performance reasons. And our page views tanked because now it wasn't firing the beacon as soon as possible. The page views is what the market at the time was using for valuation of AOL. So we got a lot of nasty grams from the CEO asking what the hell was happening to our traffic and things like that. And so you don't work performance in a bubble, right? And so it's about figuring out how can you load all of these things, do the retargeting tags that you need to be able to get the recirculation and advertising revenue without impacting negatively the user experience. And how can you have a good user experience without negatively impacting the marketing and the business needs of the site?
Yeah, you just reminded me how I first met Steve Souders, him at Yahoo calling me at DoubleClick and complaining that I was slowing down his website. Yeah, memories.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, gentlemen. I think we're coming up to the top of the hour as well. Are there any, Patrick, maybe any final comments before we wrap up?
No, the only thing I will ask is, please keep us honest. Please, if you're interested in joining the Webpagetest team, ping me, ping Patrick. We're interested. We're hiring. And look forward to continuing the conversation around Webpagetest, around what we're going to do around the university, the education part, and we're really going to count on you to keep this momentum going and make things better. with the promise that nothing that you have got to love about Webpagetest is going to change. So I
Great.
reiterate that.
Thank you. Just by the way, a little bit of a plug-in here on the marketing side. There is a page on catchpoint.com. There is actually a link you can sign up for product updates. We just add your name to the list, and we can follow up with you if you have any questions about what we're going to do next. So we can wrap this up. Thank you very much, Mehdi. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everybody for all your questions. These were
Yeah.
great, and we'll do this again. Once we have more news, more to share, we'll do this again. This worked out pretty well, and I appreciate all the questions, and have a great day. Thank you. Now,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye,
Thanks.
everyone. Bye.